I got married right after graduating from community college. Back in the day, it was expected for a woman to get married young. People may call it misogynism, but unmarried women over 30 were often mocked and ridiculed. So, when I was told to consider getting an arranged marriage before graduation, I obediently agreed. The resume of the man I was to meet stated that he graduated from a prestigious university and joined a top-tier company, where he was seen as a promising rookie. But when I met him, he was just an ordinary-looking man. Nothing really stood out. Still, he didn't seem like a bad person, and more importantly, my parents were the ones suggesting him, so I decided to marry him. Honestly, I wasn't quite looking forward to getting married. It's because I had seen how my father treated my mother. In my eyes, the head of the family, my father, seems like nothing more than an authoritarian figure at home. Indeed, once I got married, my husband acted just like my father, bossing around and not helping around the house at all. Even though I knew it was the norm, submitting myself to being ordered around wasn't pleasant. Eventually, I got pregnant and gave birth to a boy. My in-laws were overjoyed, particularly because we had a male heir. My parents also smiled with joy at the birth of their grandchild. My husband also complimented me, saying, "Well done," which was a rare thing for him to say. As for me, I only felt relief from the long hours of labor and discomfort. Child rearing was another challenge. My husband believes that child rearing was a wife's job, so he didn't help at all. In fact, he complained about not being able to sleep due to the sound of nighttime feedings. When the baby cried, he blamed me, saying, "You're the problem. Take proper care of him." Now I had to look after both my husband and baby, and it was overwhelming. I complained to my mother sometimes, but she just said, "It's a phase everyone goes through." Still, thankfully, my child grew very quickly. Before I knew it, he started crawling, then standing and walking. Just as I thought things might get easier when he starts preschool, I found out I was pregnant again. My days were occupied with watching my toddler wander around, looking after him, doing housework, caring for my husband, all while carrying a big belly. It was intensive labor. Nevertheless, time passed, and my kids graduated from preschool and entered elementary school, then junior high and high school. My eldest son went on to major in economics at a renowned university, and then secured a job at a famous company. My daughter was told to attend a community college by my father, but she went against him. My daughter insisted that she wanted to work part-time to pay for her own tuition and pursue her studies at a four-year college. It was the first time I had ever voiced my opinion to my husband since our marriage. Women are now making their marks in companies and other places, so please let her go to a four-year college, I pleaded with my husband. However, he berated me, saying, "You have no say in this. What could someone as ignorant as you possibly know?" But I didn't back down. For my daughter, I fought hard. As a result, under the condition of securing a scholarship, my daughter was able to attend a four-year college. She continued to receive scholarships for 4 years and graduated from college with good grades. She then secured a job at a major corporation. "Thank you, Mom. I promise to repay this kindness. I'll never forget how you supported my college education and job hunting." My daughter told me as she left home for her job. Those words alone made me feel like 30 years of my hardship since getting married got rewarded. Now that my 2 children had left home, I suddenly found myself with a lot of free time. Of course, I still had to take care of my husband as before. But compared to when I was also raising children, it became significantly easier. With all the free time on my hands, I started talking more with the ladies in my neighborhood. When I mentioned that I had become completely idle, the lady next door suggested, "Why not try working part-time? The supermarket over there is always hiring. I actually work there 3 times a week." That's what she told me. I had never worked part-time before, but I had always wanted to earn my own money. When I gathered my courage and mentioned my interest of working part-time to my husband, he said, It's disgraceful for a married woman to work. It makes it seem like I'm not making enough money," and frowned upon me. But when I insisted that other ladies in our neighborhood were working as well, and it was a waste not to use my free time, my husband thought about it. He then said, "I don't think you can handle working a job, but go ahead and try. You'll probably be called incompetent and get fired right away," and laughed maliciously. He's always been like this, never approving whenever I tried to do something, always saying it was impossible or that I lacked the ability. But this time he somewhat approved, and I thought maybe he had softened a bit with age. In the end, I started working part-time at the local supermarket 3 times a week during the day. The hourly wage isn't that bad for a cash register and stocking job. While restocking, there were times when my back ached from carrying and lifting heavy loads. And at times, some of the young male student staffs would help me with the heavy lifting. I found it strangely refreshing to see that not all men were like my husband. And getting to talk with other part-time ladies during break time was new to me and fun as well. There were people of all ages, ranging from 20s to 60s, so the conversations were diverse too. Especially the young ones were surprised when I told them that I got married right after graduating from community college and this was my first job. "I mean, you are incredibly patient. I could never date a man who's as domineering as your husband." The young ones all agreed, saying, "Absolutely." Those of us who were older just weakly laughed and said, "It used to be the norm back in our days." However, there was one thing that troubled me about starting this part-time job. My husband stopped giving the same amount of money for household expenses, saying, "You're earning now." He laughingly added that it was only fair for me to contribute to the household expenses since he had allowed me to work. I was disappointed because I had been looking forward to having some money of my own. One of the women in her 30s, who often works the same shift as me, noticed my downcast mood and asked what was wrong. I was a bit embarrassed to talk about money, but I wanted to vent, so I told her about my situation. She asked me, "Wait a second, do you always do what your husband says?" I answered, "Well, I'm his wife," and she put her hands on her head. "Look, it's not normal these days to have such a sexist mindset. I have to tell you, it's a clear case of emotional abuse." She explained in detail about emotional abuse, and I finally understood that my husband's behavior over the years was indeed abusive. I was astonished at the realization that I had been a victim of emotional abuse. Around this time, I noticed my husband was up to something suspicious. He seemed to have started going out at night, perhaps because he had more pocket money now that he was giving less to the household. One time, I found several cards from strip clubs in his suit's pocket. There were times when he came home reeking of perfume, but I thought to myself, if it were my father, he would say, "A little nightlife is just a man proving his masculinity." I was sure my husband would say the same thing. It would be easy to confront him about it, but doing so would likely only result in him finding an excuse or getting angry. I had been enduring here as well. Due to such circumstances, my stress had accumulated, and I suppose it had exhausted my body. One day, while at work, a severe pain ran through my lower back, rendering me immobile. My manager and part-time colleagues were worried for me and urged me to leave early to see a doctor. I was grateful for their concern for me and left early as they suggested. I lay down at home, then the pain felt like it had slightly gotten better. I was relieved, thinking it was just back pain, and proceeded to prepare dinner. However, the pain returned as soon as I bent over. The pain was unbearable, and I found myself laying on the floor again. And of all days, my husband happened to come home early today. Upon seeing me laying in the kitchen, he angrily asked, "What are you doing in such a miserable state?" When I complained about my severe back pain, he retorted, "It's because you're working part-time at this age. You've brought this upon yourself." Knowing that dinner was not ready, he stormed out of the house again. I was at a loss, but in my immobile state, I had no choice but to call an ambulance. I crawled to the entrance, and while waiting for the ambulance, tears started falling due to the pain and frustration. My husband, who had left his wife writhing in pain, and myself. Not once in 30 years of being together have I ever been able to speak up against my husband, and that made me angry with myself. The paramedics were shocked to see me lying alone at the entrance and hurriedly loaded me onto the stretcher and took me to the emergency hospital. Upon examination, it turned out to be an acute herniated disc. The doctor said to me, "You've endured this well." Acute hernias are extremely painful, and there are people who can't even call an ambulance because they can't move. "It was unfortunate that this happened while your husband was not at home." That's what the doctor said, but I just gave a vague smile. At this time, I felt my built-up frustration crossing the limit and overflowing. That day, I received an IV painkiller and a strong painkiller prescription before I went home. Thankfully, with the help of the painkiller, I was able to somewhat move around. When my husband came home late at night, he spewed at me. "You were overreacting and even slacked off making dinner." The next day, I called my part-time job and told my manager about my herniated disc. I think it's better to quit for now so as not to be an inconvenience for others. When I said this, my manager replied, "No, it's fine. We'll take it as a leave. We can't let go of a hard-working worker like you." From his kind words, I was moved to tears. Fortunately, thanks to the painkillers and some good rest, the pain gradually subsided. By the time 2 weeks had passed, although there was still pain, I could move around just fine. I returned to my part-time job, and everyone cared enough to not let me handle any heavy items. I'm grateful for everyone's kindness. To this, they all replied with a laugh. "What are you talking about? Of course we wouldn't make a recovering person take on hard labor." I didn't mention that there was someone at home who couldn't say or do those thoughtful things. A month after my emergency hospitalization, we had to call for an ambulance again at our house. It seems that my husband's night out had taken a toll on him. He started complaining of back pain as soon as he got home. "Call an ambulance." Reluctantly, I called an ambulance for him. Then I said to my husband, "You told me it was shameful to make a fuss over this level of pain." As for my husband, either he didn't hear my words or he was just too busy groaning in pain. In less than 10 minutes, the ambulance arrived and the paramedics brought a stretcher. When they heard my husband couldn't stand due to back pain, they quickly put him on a stretcher and loaded him into the ambulance. Then, turning to me, "Ma'am, please join us in the ambulance," one of them said. I smiled and firmly replied, "No, I won't accompany him." The paramedic looked puzzled, but my husband's groans seemed to prioritize their attention. They quickly drove off. I went back into the house, entered my room, and picked up a bag I had prepared for this day. Inside were my bank book, some cash, and my phone. All that was left to grab was a small suitcase, a luggage with some clothes, and other essentials. Before leaving, I left a document and a note on the living room table. Then I called my daughter. "Can I come over now?" My daughter, delighted, said, "Come right away." My daughter always told me, "Don't stick with that man any longer. It's better to leave." I left home without looking back. After settling in at my daughter's apartment and telling her about how much my husband had been moaning in pain, she laughed heartily and said, "That's karma for treating you like a workhorse and making a fool out of you." From that night, my phone was flooded with emails and calls from my husband. His calls became so incessant that I had to block them, as my daughter had suggested. Just to be safe, my daughter also reached out to our eldest son. Initially, our son was sympathetic to my husband, perhaps out of some misguided sense of male camaraderie. However, once my daughter explained the whole fiasco of both mine and my husband's back injuries, he tersely dismissed it with, "Dad's in the wrong." About a week later, I decided to visit our home. I had to retrieve the divorce papers I had left there. I figured my husband would be home on a Sunday, and luckily he was. And the first thing he said to me was, "You regret leaving, don't you? I'll forgive you and let you come back." He sat there smugly as he said it. Looking at the state of the house, I couldn't help but sigh. It had only been a week, but the living room was littered with trash and my husband's clothes. The kitchen appeared to be unused, but the sink was filled with piles of cutlery and dishes. I was sure then that my husband wasn't just emotionally abusive, but also incapable of taking care of himself too. So I said to him, "Hand me the divorce papers I left." My husband sat there, mouth agape. At his dumbfounded expression, I couldn't help but laugh. Furious, he shouted back at me, "After all these years I've provided for you, how could you do this to me? I could sue you." I responded calmly, I'm the one with the right to sue you here. Your behavior is pure emotional abuse. And even just for that, I could claim damages in today's world. Besides, look at this place. I looked around the room. You're so helpless, you can't even manage basic chores. Don't act high and mighty. You can't even live right without me. So here's something else for you. I handed him a piece of paper. It was a bill, converting almost 30 years of my housework into an hourly wage. I should tell you, I've recorded the harsh words you said to me over the past year on my phone. My lawyer assured me that the contents alone make for sufficient evidence of your emotional abuse. Isn't that right, sir? I looked back at the entrance of the living room. I had also asked the lawyer to come as a witness, and just in case my husband tried to resort to physical violence. Seeing the stern look on the lawyer's face, my husband attempted to defend himself. It's a wife's duty to obey her husband. Don't start with this nonsense about emotional abuse. The lawyer sighed heavily. Ma'am, this is no good. He doesn't seem to understand what he's done wrong. I think you should just go ahead and sue him. My husband widened his eyes and then hung his head low. As is often the case with people of older generations, my husband couldn't speak against someone who was of higher class than him, especially not against the authority of the law or a lawyer. Eventually, our divorce was finalized on the grounds of his emotional abuse. I demanded compensation for the years of housework I had done and for the emotional distress he had caused me. After discussions between our lawyers, all my demands were met. His lawyer, too, seemed fed up with his attitude. My ex-husband had apparently sought help from our son, but he told him, I'm siding with Mom on this one. After the divorce, my ex-husband couldn't even clean up after himself, and his house eventually turned into a place full of trash. However, it seems he's somehow managing to go to work. From what I've heard, he's gotten sloppy and unhygienic, and because of that, he's been moved to a less demanding role at work. Also, the word got around in his office about the divorce due to his emotional abuse, which might result in him getting fired even before his retirement. Meanwhile, I am living happily with my daughter. Sometimes my son also gives us a call. And I am spending my days working at a part-time job where everyone is kind.